education services amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. I just want to give you all some guidelines. This is a virtual meeting, so there are specific guidelines that will apply. Please ensure to mute your microphones when you're not speaking to help us keep the background noise from our various locations that you're coming from to a minimum. And when you're about to speak, we invite you to turn your mics on or unmute your microphones. And of course, we've all gone through the protocol already of adjusting your cameras so that your faces are clearly visible. If you are on cell phones or any other electronic device in your vicinity, please ensure that they're muted at this time for the course of this meeting. I'm the committee's chairman, Paul Richards, and at this time, I'd like to also ask members of the committee to introduce themselves, starting with Member Hussein. Please unmute your mic, Member Hussein.
My apologies. Good morning to everyone. My name is Christine Uwalo Hussein, member, and I welcome you to this most important inquiry today.
Antoine?
Good morning, everyone. I am General Ansel Antoine, member, and welcome to this virtual meeting.
And we'll be joined in process by Member Khadija Amin. Other members of the committee include the Vice Chair of the committee, MP Esmond Ford, also Mrs. Glenda Jennings-Smith, Mr. Rohan Sinanan, and Member Alice Nuest, who are unavoidably otherwise detained at this time. We have two stakeholder groups before us today, inclusive of the Ministry of Education and, of course, representatives of the Trinidad Tobago Unified Teachers Association. So at this time, I'd like to invite members from the Education Ministry to please identify themselves, starting with the Acting Permanent Secretary. Please unmute your microphone.
Good morning, Kurt Meyer, Acting Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education.
Ms. Henry David. And let's go.
Good morning, Mr. Henry David, Acting Chief Education Officer.
Thank you. And Mr. Conrad, sorry.
Yes, I'm Professor Dennis Conrad. I'm Student Support Services Manager.
Thank you. And now the Trinidad Tobago Unified Teachers Association, starting with the President, then the First Vice President and General Secretary.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Antonia Tika de Freitas, President of Tutor.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Marlon Seals, and I am the First Vice President of Tutor.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Beckles, and I am Tutor's General Secretary.
Thank you all for being with us, and we appreciate you taking time to be with us, and of course, your continued service to Trinidad Tobago and your charges during this difficult time that Trinidad Tobago and the region and the world is facing. And this is a good segue to the objectives of this inquiry. There are four objectives. One, to examine the gaps in the continuity measures of the Ministry of Education during the COVID-19 pandemic. Two, to assess the accessibility of electronic distance learning initiatives to poor and particularly marginalized students of ECCE, primary and secondary schools during the COVID-19 pandemic. Three, to assess the Ministry of Education support interventions for low achievers and special needs learners in EEC, primary and secondary school students. And four, to examine teachers' responses and teacher support systems during the COVID-19 pandemic. At this time, I'd like to invite the two leaders of the stakeholder groups to deliver opening remarks. We asked them to be about 2 minutes. First, of course, the Acting Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Education, Mr. Kurt Meyer.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee, members of the public. The COVID-19 pandemic was an unprecedented crisis. In the space of a 24-hour period, the Ministry of Education and all our stakeholders were forced to move from a situation where we were providing teaching and learning in structures to finding ways to offer the same services virtually. The ministry has managed this crisis by keeping our day-to-day operations running using remote services. We have provided some level of alternate teaching and learning options using solutions developed in-house by the ministry staff, and as might add, at no cost to the taxpayer. Our response has been appropriate given our resource constraints. Our ability to respond to this challenge has been primarily due to the dedication of our staff, the teachers, principals, school supervisors, curriculum officers, administrative officers, finance and accounts, and our ICT personnel. Teachers provided access to online classes using their personal devices. Those who could not use other platforms to send homework and to monitor and to provide some level of learning. As we have reported, there are gaps in our service delivery and we're working towards filling them. We welcome the opportunity to discuss our progress, to share our ideas, and to listen to suggestions on how we can improve our service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Now, Mrs. De Freitas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, colleagues, members of the committee. Tutor thanks you for the opportunity to speak here this morning and share the perspective of teachers, of educators during this whole COVID-19 situation. As Mr. Meyer said, it's an unprecedented situation and our teachers stepped in from the get-go, from the 16th of March, interacting with students, engaging with students. As it stands right now, we understand that there are gaps, that there are challenges, and tutor will be pleased to provide the information that we have so we can address those situations going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to add my own context, when we decided on this inquiry, we thought it quite appropriate. And it is not a blame game inquiry. It is not about casting or castigating it. We realize, as many others in Trinidad and Tobago, that the COVID-19 pandemic is something that the world has had to grapple with and face and put systems in place in several different sectors to ensure that stakeholders are serviced. And in some cases, some sectors have done well. And in critical services like education, we realized that there were gaps in the system because of the quick nature of the transition that had to be initiated. So part of what we want to do here is find out where the gaps are, what the support services that need more support, and of course come up with recommendations so that at the end of the day, the learners are the ones who benefit from this, because we know that there are gaps in terms of the types of services that are being prevented, particularly to marginalized learners in Trinidad and Tobago. So let me just open by adding also that the presumption is that much of the learning transitioned to online, and I know the Education Ministry also provided very quickly and admirably television and radio support in terms of providing curriculum in television delivery over many of the television stations in Trinidad Tobago, including TTT, CNC3 and TV6, also an online repository of information, and also uploading curriculum and content online. But a lot of the online delivery is based on the predicate or the presumption that one, learners have devices to receive the content, and two, learners have access to internet through which the content can pass through the devices, and other, of course, variables in the mix. So we want to examine them as objectively as possible to find out where the gaps is, because you're the persons who are on the field. The Education Ministry has had to come together and deal with it. I know they've been able to fast track what would have been in process anyway. And also tutor, as the stakeholder representing the teachers in Trinidad Tobago, would have had to also rise to the cause. So it's not a blame game situation. It's not about castigation. I just want to provide that context for us for an open and frank discussion on how we can facilitate the process being more efficient moving forward. One of the things that startled me in terms of what was presented, and again, it's just to lay context, is we have 120,455 primary school students registered and 83,554 secondary schools registered. And I took the liberty of sending forward some questions to the Ministry of Education in terms of trying to assess the lay of the land, as it were. And the information coming back was that 68,000 on average of students were in need of devices to access the curriculum, and also 27,000 in a looser sense were in need of internet access. So let's start with the Education Ministry in terms of if there's an update on that information, and what is being done to mitigate those who do not have either devices or internet at this time or moving forward into the immediate future.
Okay, well, the first question, That is the most up-to-date information we have right now. 68,000 is our last count as of yesterday. We have been collating information almost from day one, but we have been severely challenged in getting the information. And the reason for that is that the Ministry of Education primarily gets this information from teachers, principals, using a paper-based environment. In January, we launched our EMIS, which is our Education Management Information System. And the lack of that system being able to being fully implemented, we felt it very keenly when your questions came. Because when we looked at those questions, we realized that if EMIS was populated up and running, most of the answers would have been online. As it was, we had to gather that information using the old-fashioned method, send out surveys, manually get the information. As to what we are doing, we recognized very early on that there was a gap, and the gap basically has four moving parts. The first part is the lack of access to Wi-Fi from students, the lack of devices from students. Teachers also don't have devices. Some of them don't have access. There is also an issue of training, but by and large, I think the teachers who went on were able to overcome that burden. So the real problems are the devices and the access. In terms of the students' access, and well, access generally, we have been in consultation with TAT and some of the ISPs. And I think generally we have reached a situation where they can be given access to at least our servers free of charge. So the second problem is actually getting the devices to the teachers. Part of the survey we've been doing in the last 2 to 3 weeks, and we've only just completed it last week, was we tried to find out how many teachers actually need the devices. We were able to identify, I believe it's over 5,000 teachers who require devices. And we are working towards distributing those laptops, hopefully by next week. Now, we were very lucky in this case again, because we had procured a significant number of laptops for use in the schools. So we have laptops for teachers. Devices for students, that has been a very severe challenge, because the initial numbers we were looking at was roughly around 60,000, which is a staggering figure. And eventually, when we started to get more information, we got that down to 68,000. We have been meeting with various agencies. We have had some promises from UNICEF and some other agencies of quite a few laptops. Some local stakeholders have also provided us some laptops. We also are in the process of preparing a note to cabinet to request devices, because we realize that as generous as the private sector is going to be, it's not going to be able to fill the gap. So we have come up with a basic specification for tablets, and that is what we're going to try to procure in a very short space of time. Thank you.
And that represents about 33.3% of the student body, primary and secondary school, who are in need of devices, which is significant. And you mentioned that 5,000 teachers are in need of that. Mrs. De Freitas, what percentage of the teaching body in primary and secondary schools does that represent, if you can? And what has been the challenges where teachers are concerned in terms of that? And those who have devices probably having to use their own devices and the security issues that may arise because of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We would estimate that's probably about 5% of our membership of our teachers at this point in time. And as Mr. Meyer reported, the Ministry of Education did indicate, the minister, indicated to tutor in a meeting that cabinet gave approval for about 12,000 laptops to be issued to teachers. The challenge arose where we had to look at, one, the distribution during the stay-at-home period, and the tutor advised members not to go out or disobey the public health regulations. And two, the contract, given the fact that we were looking at dispensing with government equipment to persons, we felt that it was necessary to review the contract. Tutor has reviewed the contract, and we submitted it back to the CEO, the acting CEO, Ms. Henry David, for their final perspectives. And so as far as we are concerned, those teachers who have desired laptops, they should be able to access it in due course based on how quickly the process goes forward with contracts and so forth. If I may continue, sir.
No, just Member Hussein had a question. Member Hussein, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry.
Unmute your mic, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, the 12,000 laptops that you're referring to, that is Mr. Freitas, and of course it would stem from the response of Mr. Mayor. Is this the laptops? Are these the laptops that the minister had indicated that would have been provided to schools, 50 laptops to schools some time ago? Are these the 12,000 laptops that you're referring to?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think the ministry may be better able to provide the answer to that question. Our interaction indicated 12,000, and we were told that these were laptops that were delivered to schools in 2018. So they were new laptops. But I think as far as the details as to where they're coming from, the ministry might be better able to provide that information.
Yes, these laptops were purchased around 2018. They were delivered to secondary schools, and they are basically brand new laptops. I think on average, they probably have 50 hours of use on them. So they are brand new devices.
If I may ask a question, these laptops, are they currently being utilized by the teachers in this regard when we have COVID-19? Or are they the property of the schools and have to remain in the schools? The laptops, I mean, I would assume that the laptops, if the teachers lack the devices and they are able to utilize these laptops that were provided, right now, from what you're saying, is only to secondary schools, were they able to utilize it to be able to provide online classes to their students? Or are these laptops still in the possession of the schools and are not being utilized in this regard?
The laptops are still in the school. They are going to be distributed to both primary and secondary teachers who require them.
And in other words, you're saying that the laptops were in fact distributed in 2018 when they procured to secondary schools. So now you're going to retrieve it from the secondary schools and distribute it across the board in terms of secondary and primary. And how do you intend to do that, sir? What is the criteria that is going to be used to determine which schools will get and which schools will not?
We will not distributing to schools, we'll be distributing to individuals. A survey was conducted and we have names of all teachers who have indicated that they require a laptop to conduct online classes. Once the contract has been finalized, the laptops will be distributed to the teachers. They can go to the school, collect the laptop, sign for it, and they can then go home and deliver online services.
How many laptops are there, sir?
In all, or to be distributed?
That were procured and will be distributed.
Approximately 12,000 laptops were procured and assigned to secondary schools for IT classes or for just general use. Mm-hmm. Those laptops will then be redistributed to teachers.
So all 12,000?
Not all 12,000. I believe the number is roughly 5,800. It could be more, as I suspect teachers may require, there may be more teachers who require devices, who are using the devices now. But until this crisis is over, the ministry is prepared to use that stock of laptops to give teachers the ability to access and contact their students.
And Mr. Myers, to maybe realign your frames a bit because you're leaning forward and crashing into the headspace, as we indicated before. We know this is new for all of us, so it's a work in progress. Member Antoine, you had a question?
Tutor indicated that they submitted on the 5th of May a copy of the guidelines to members working from home during the COVID-19 period. Can both tutor and the ministry will give me an update on that document that was submitted?
Mr. Chair, if I may, can I allow our General Secretary, Ms. Katie Beckles, to respond?
First.
No.
Right. Good morning once again. Yes, our General Counsel, together with our Industrial Relations Committee, would have worked on a document that would assist teachers in terms of giving them guidelines as they worked from home. I can give you the basic headings that were covered under those guidelines. If you will just give me 1 minute to pull that document up.
Absolutely, and I just want to remind all our participants to make sure and stay centered in your frames so that we have a nice output in the final product to be broadcast to the general public. Mr. Freitas, you need to go up a little bit more. Thank you very much for your cooperation. All right, go back a little bit. Right, thank you. And raise your frame so that you're not so crushed at the bottom of the frame. Ms. Beckles, are you ready for us? Please unmute your mic.
Right, I'm unmuted. Okay, so let me get back to the document. Right, so essentially, we provided a preamble in terms of the COVID-19 situation. And then our statement of objectives, where these guidelines were developed in an effort to ensure that teachers' rights were not infringed as the government shapes its pandemic response, and to safeguard teachers from litigation while protecting the rights of children to education. Basic guidelines, the headlines, sorry, the contractual guideline, communication in terms of reporting, in terms of requesting parental consent via email or messaging in order to communicate with students via the online platform. Also advising members if, whilst they were performing their duties, if they observed any untoward
content
in the background, that they were bounded by law to report it to the police and to their principal. All right, because since these things are easily recorded, you know, it's easy to get out there. Professionalism was another heading where we reminded our teachers to follow our code of conduct and ethics, to be courteous, and also to encourage them to keep a log of the work taught and attendance roster, as that would facilitate an easier transition when school eventually reopened. Since during this time, as a period of revision for our students, and we were mindful that not all students would have been able to access the various platforms for whatever reason, bearing in mind that in various homes, you would have a number of students and there might be one device and they would have to share that up during the day. All right, we also give them guidelines in terms of realistic expectations, in terms of spending time in front of the screen, both for teachers and students at the different levels. ECCE, we encourage more playtime, so we had 0 minutes, 0 minutes in front of the screen. Infants 1 and 2, 20 minutes per day. Standards 1 to 2, 30 minutes. Standard 3, 40 minutes. Standards 4 and 5, 60 minutes. Forms 1, 2, and 3, 90 minutes at three sessions at 30 minutes. And forms 4, 5, and 6, 120 minutes. We're basically breaking that up into 4 sessions at 30 minutes. All right, moving along, we also included safety and security, right? We needed teachers should take reasonable steps to ensure their workspace was safe. Also, Teachers and parents, administration shall work together to ensure that the time students are required to spend is unlikely to be harmful to them, given their age, special needs, and or any environmental conditions to which they may be subjected. Anyone on one session, example, pastoral care meeting, shall be risk assessed and approved by the school's leadership. Teachers must be aware of the safety measures to take if they are having a problem communicating with a child. Work-life balance. This is something that we encouraged and included in our document because this COVID situation has been affecting persons differently. So we advised them to strike a balance and that reminded them that it was not school as usual. So it couldn't be that you was going to be in front of your class for a period of 5 hours or so for the day, watching over each child, right? We also, as I said before, reminded them of our teachers' code of ethics, which we would have also forwarded to them.
I think that's quite comprehensive, and if you could just send us a list of it, we'd be able to peruse it. What I want to do
I can send the document.
I appreciate that. What I want to do is go to the Chief Education Officer Acting, Mrs. Lisa Henry David, and ask you the hours and interface schedules outlined by Ms. Beckles. Did the Education Ministry collaborate on defining those in terms of the schedule for classrooms? And is that part of what the Education Ministry has initiated because of the safety requirements and in exposure to screen time and how the Education Ministry expected it to roll out, even though under exigent circumstances moving forward? So if Ms. Henry David can respond to that, please. Ms. Henry David, are you hearing us?
Yes. Sorry, I'm hearing you now. I was cut off for a short while there. So is it possible for you to repeat the question?
Okay, no problem. Ms. Beckers indicated a while ago that they had sent out a communique to teachers, tutor that is, about the schedule of time for primary, secondary school and ECCE learners in terms of interface with teachers and scheduling to try as much as possible to get the curriculum done while observing screen time safety protocols for learners. Was the Education Ministry collaborated with on that? And has that been done by the Education Ministry in terms of trying to streamline scheduling of classes, exposure time for students and the teachers to try to complete as much as the curriculum that can be completed in terms of delivery, even under these exigent circumstances? Ms. Henry David? Did you hear the question? I think she's having some internet problems, so we'll come back to her in a short while. Let me go back to then the Chief Education, the Permanent Secretary acting on that. Was that part of a collaborative effort, Mr. Meyer? I'm wondering if you have an audio problem with your microphone because we're not hearing you as clearly as we were hearing you before. So if you could ensure that the audio system is what it was before, because we will.
You're hearing me now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you. Go ahead. Start over, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we reviewed tutors' guidelines. It is basically in line with what we have been working on. We have initiated discussions with the Chief Personnel Officer because we think that these guidelines need to be done in a very structured manner. We cannot at this time be too prescriptive in terms of guidelines because a lot of the teachers are voluntarily doing this. So therefore we cannot mandate guidelines for one set of teachers and for others who aren't able to actually access. But generally, the guidelines are what we would want to put in place. And we have no difficulty with what we saw. Probably a few tweaks, probably some less hours, because right now the system is actually changing. With the LMS, we are able to monitor in some detail what is actually taking place. And there are teachers right now who are managing classes of the size of 120 students for over 3 hours. There are some significant learnings from this in terms of how teachers are managing. Students are going where they're engaged. Teachers are able to control 120 children for 3 hours, which is an amazing feat considering the trauma that everyone is going through. CEO, I think, is able to respond now.
Yes, go ahead. Is she up? I think she's having some internet problems, probably. Could you unmute your mic, please, Mrs. Henry David? And go ahead, please.
Unmute your mic.
Yeah, she's unmuted.
Go ahead. We're hearing you. Go ahead, please.
So, in addition to what PS would have indicated, are you hearing me now?
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead, please.
In addition to what PSMI would have indicated, the ministry has also drafted a policy for online teaching and learning, and this document will be sent to the cabinet in the coming weeks once it is completed, but it is intended to outline policies related to the range of online teaching and learning issues, to govern the application, approval, and registration of private online teaching schools, classes, and courses, and to outline the processes and procedures for staff, students, and parents to continue with an academic program in the event of school closures. So it goes beyond the pandemic, and it is meant to govern any instance where children have to be out of the physical school compound for a while.
I'm going to go to Member Antoine, who's been waiting a while, and then Member Hussein, you can take over after that. Member Antoine, go ahead, please.
Yes, we are hearing from Tutor, Ministry of Education. I'm aware that NPTA is not here this morning, but overtures made towards the NPTA, seeing that they represent the parents about these guidelines and how they can interact with the teachers and their children who will be utilizing this online teaching method.
I don't know if Mrs. De Freitas wants to take that, or the Education Ministry Permanent Secretary or Chief Education Officer.
We do intend to meet with the NPTA.
So you haven't met with the NPTA yet?
Not yet.
Okay, Mrs. De Freitas, have you had interface with the NPTA?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Tutor sent a copy of the guidelines to the NPTA. We will be aware that there are some internal issues with NPTA and their structure. So to all different factions, entities within the organization. So they are aware, and we have spoken to them about the intent of the document. If I may, Mr. Chair, just add something.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, in terms of the policy document that the acting CEO spoke about, tutors of the view that such a document is required to safeguard as we transition from the COVID period into the post-COVID scenario. And therefore, as the PS said, it may not be as prescriptive as the guidelines are. We will be looking at overall policy. What we would want to guard against, however, colleagues, is the issue of allowing privatization of the education process to creep into that capacity for online delivery, especially for students below tertiary level. So that's something we would have to consider in a subsequent discussion.
And could you elaborate, what does that mean, privatization of the process?
Across the globe, there are situations where private corporations, large corporations, for example, go into countries, go into environments, and you have to pay for education. For example, in some countries in Africa, you have scenarios where American-run corporations go in. You have to pay, the government pays these corporations to fund their primary education programs. It's not as prevalent as in the Caribbean as it is in other parts of the world. That is a problem that Education International, the governing body for teachers unions worldwide, we've been grappling with that for a number of years. In Trinidad and Tobago, what we essentially have are institutions, Mr. Richards, you will be familiar with our institutions that provide tertiary education. That's different from privatization, where you're providing education services to a catchment of people who are not in a position, or who should be really, receiving universal free education.
I understand what you're saying, but from my understanding of our situation, we have universal free education at ECCE primary and secondary schools, and they are private institutions to which people can send their children. But it's not. We have had a statewide policy of that free education for a while. So I don't think I understand you citing it, but it's not really an issue in Trinidad to me at this time. But I appreciate you citing it. Member Hussein, you wanted to chime in on this conversation.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. Mr. Mayor, you had indicated that this teachers are doing it voluntarily, which begs the question: what percentage of teachers and schools at the various levels, whether it's ECCE, the primary, secondary, and even tertiary, are involved in the online delivery teaching and learning programs? And of course, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Meyer, you can go ahead and respond.
Okay, using our LMS figures, we are able to track that as of today, we have approximately 4,000 students, 4,000 teachers who are providing some level of online service. They would be servicing approximately 49,000 students in an online class. Now that is our LMS. We are aware that there are a number of other systems that are being operated. Some teachers are contacting their students using WhatsApp, some via email, some via phone call. So we are not able to really say the absolute number, but we suspect that we probably have the largest group, which is probably 4,006. So it's probably not more than half of all the teachers right now. Given the numbers who are actually requesting devices, we suspect it's probably about 50%. But as I said, I can't say for sure.
And are you satisfied that sufficient online schooling has taken place to allow for one, the effective delivery and completion of the Term 3 curriculum, and more importantly, in preparation for CSEC, completion of the school-based assessment?
Absolutely not. We are extremely not satisfied at all. And we have been working towards bridging the gap. In fact, our mission since March the 15th, when we were forced to shut our schools, has been to deliver online services to all 225,000 children. That mission has not been completed yet, and it is a daunting task, because what we are doing is we are basically trying to intervene in households where the parents themselves do not have the ability to provide internet access or the devices. So the ministry is trying to intervene in that area. But no, we are definitely not satisfied. But it is a situation that if we had had even a little bit of lead time in terms of knowing that this was going to happen, we would have be able to do things differently. But it came as a shock to us, as it did to most of the country and to most of the world.
Well, to be fair to the acting permanent secretary's response, Member Hussein, and that's why I laid the context from the very start that I would have been surprised if Mr. Mayor or anyone in the education ministry or anyone in Tutor or anyone in the country can honestly say that they're surprised. And while we are trying to find solutions to what is no doubt a daunting, evolving situation, it is an adaptive and evolving situation in many regards. So, I appreciate the ministry's efforts, and what we really want to do is find solutions. I want to go to the Student Support Services and Professor Conrad and ask, in light of what we've discussed so far, in terms of the gaps that have evolved because it's an exigent circumstance, COVID-19, that has forced the education ministry and forced parents home in some instances. And just to add, to what the teachers are dealing with. In many cases, teachers also have to supervise their own children at home in this circumstance. It's also that added to it. It's not a perfect situation by any means. What has the role been of the student support services in trying to bridge the gap, not only with special needs learners, but now learners who are now faced with these inequities brought on by COVID-19 and trying to re-equalize the situation as much as possible? So if Mr. Conrad can give us an overall sense of the response from student support services through this whole situation, please. Mr. Conrad, Professor Conrad?
You hear me clearly?
Yes, Ryan, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Well, we are very fortunate in that we were actually at a time, student support services was just at the time when both the Ministry of Education was pushing its agenda for using the digital platforms more, as well as we were very much involved in working towards our inclusive schools and pushing forward in terms of improving the accessibility of education for all. So we were, yes, we're thrown backwards, but the dispositions and the readiness was really moving forward. So we found a situation where our social workers, our guidance officers, our psychologists, our special educators in different areas were already on the ground trying to engage our stakeholders, both within the ministry as well as outside of the ministry. We were able to set up quickly a hotline system. We have been able, for the most part, to utilize the platform to provide and engage our students and teachers as well as our parents, as well as we still have special ed teachers and guidance officers, social workers who are literally putting packages in mailboxes. And we are finding that WhatsApp, for example, the students are much more comfortable using WhatsApp than even going on the platform. We have parents who are teachers and other professionals claiming that this is tough work, trying to be able to manage home, motivate kids, and perhaps the greatest challenge we're having are in terms of students who are marginalized because of interpersonal skills. This might include students with special needs, like those with autism, as well as students who may be facing stresses, well-being, who are not likely to be able to maintain a sustained interaction with any platform. To engage them, you'll only get them for about 2-3 minutes. Yet we have schools, some of our schools and our special ed teachers have been using Zoom for personal and effective education to keep them feeling as part of their community, for keeping them involved and connected with each other. The fact of the matter is that once we are dealing with marginalized populations, we have to recognize that each child warrants individualized attention, warrants a responsiveness to building relationships, and warrants some sustained, systematic approach, some structure in order for them to move forward.
Professor Conrad, you're giving me all the right theoretical approaches there.
No.
Why I'm interrupting you is what I want to get a sense from you is
the frustrations.
Not the frustrations. Even before COVID-19, student support services, in my information, was stretched to the limit. There were challenges in terms of meeting the needs before COVID-19. Now there are 68,000 students who don't have internet access, or who 68,000 who don't have devices, 27% who don't have internet access. So the vulnerable group has been expanded significantly. Have you received extra funding or staff to accommodate for this vast shift in the vulnerable groups in Trinidad and Tobago?
No, not as yet.
And you were struggling before this?
We were struggling before.
So then, how are marginalized groups and this additional cohort of vulnerable groups now being attended to in the absence of added resources?
We are drowning, but we are holding on to a lifeline where we are using a strategy, and I have to do it. I agree with you, Senator, but I have to keep the message to the professionals that this is about inequity. This is about social justice. I cannot even push the argument about what we don't have. I have to push the idea about our commitment to using what we have. It's more about resourcefulness. Now, this is what I have to tell them.
Well, I think I'm posing the question to the wrong person. The question is then to the acting permanent secretary and the chief education officer. What additional resources does the ministry plan to provide to the student support services in the face of an extremely exponentially increased vulnerable groups of students, inclusive of the special education group, who are now not receiving education services in Trinidad and Tobago, pushing them into a further marginalized position? Mr. Meyer.
Our budgets are almost stretched to the limit. We are working on estimates now across the board to see if we can get additional funding. And that funding will address both student support services. It will also address funding for our devices for the children. But as it stands right now, our budgets don't have the extra capacity in it to do that. We're almost to the point of mid-year review, and some of our votes are exhausted. We didn't get sufficient allocation, but we are reviewing all of our votes, and especially the votes that have to provide services. We are trying to find a way to get additional funding to do that.
I appreciate the candor in your answer, but I'll tell you that has me very, very concerned about those 68,000 students who are now probably have not been exposed to any form of educational training or curriculum delivery in the last 6 or so weeks. Member Hussein, you had a question. Your hand was up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it raises a very important point I was making earlier, and that is under the People's Partnership, there was a thrust to move forward into a different type of training and teaching, which would have been online, and this is why we would have had the laptop initiative, which was abruptly stopped by this government. And so I'm saying to you that there would have been a policy in place to prepare for such a time as this that probably would have been ignored. And had the policy been
Member Hussein, can I interrupt?
We would not have had this.
I appreciate exactly what you're saying there, but I really want to look forward.
And I'm looking forward here. I'm asking a question. With all that is happening now, what is the situation with students in the secondary schools pursuing vocational studies, and particularly the Caribbean, the CVQ? What is happening with those students? Because they too have now become marginalized, and they have been also put into a vulnerable grouping as well. Is the ministry looking at all these, all the aspects of training, and particularly for the visually impaired? Because if visually impaired need a different type of teaching, how are we reaching those children?
Okay. Perhaps I can answer that question. Now, I think first we have to step back and be very clear that our learning management system that we are using right now was conceptualized in November 2018. It was designed and built, and it was completed in July 2019. At the same time, our education management information system followed the same developmental time and cycle. So we had both systems completed in July 2019. At that point in time, the ministry prioritized the education management information system because one of the biggest problems we have is trying to manage the Ministry of Education in the absence of a proper MIS. So that is where our resources were pushed. We pushed it towards making sure all our schools were online, to making sure the EMS, which is a very, very, very sophisticated system developed in-house. And that's where we were pushing. The LMS, for want of a better word, was put in a box. There are basic functionalities to the system, and it does have some functions that allow hearing impaired, visually impaired to utilize, but it really was not being pushed, not because we didn't want to, but because we have finite resources. And most of the resources, the school supervisors, the curriculum officers, the teachers, the principals, they were primarily tasked towards getting our EMS fully functional. So when the COVID-19 crisis occurred, we took LMS out of a box and launched it live with very little training for even our techs, very little training for teachers. And that is how we had to push that system forward. To answer the specific question about the TVET, technical vocational courses, we recognize that this is a serious gap, and we are looking very critically at virtual reality and augmented learning systems. We have had conversations with some members of the diaspora in the United States who have offered us some assistance, and we have started to look at how we can actually offer TVET class using a VR system. We have started to test it. But again, this is early stages, but we think that if we continue along that line, we would actually be able to increase our lab times in a virtual environment. Because right now, because of funding issues, we do have difficulties offering labs to students. Some students probably, if they're lucky, they get 3 labs a year. If you have a VR lab in a school, we can multiply the number of labs that you're actually able to offer. The VR technology has moved significantly in the last 5 years, and we intend to leverage on that. And that is.
I'm going to go to Member Antoine, who had his hand up, and then Mrs. DeFreitas.
Sure.
Member Antoine, go ahead, please.
We are coming to the end of May end next week. One of the questions asked by the committee involved the CSEC and CAPE exams, and a tentative date of June, July was given. We are now approaching the month of June. So therefore, I would like to get an update as to where we are in terms of these exams, and have we shifted to another date later in the year? Then I have another follow-up question.
I guess that question goes to the
Mr.
Chief
Chair,
Education Officer acting.
Yes, Mr. Chair, the Ministry has taken a note to Cabinet consequent on a meeting of the COSAD, the CARICOM heads of government with responsibility for education, and coming out of that meeting, a position was taken regionally to have the exams in the month of July, and this consideration is before the Cabinet at present. Ms. Nwalo Hossein would have asked about school-based assessments. At present, as we speak, the schools are making preparations to have the completion of those SBAs done within the time frame set by CXC.
Chair.
Mrs. Hussein, go ahead.
Hello?
Sorry, Member Antoine had a follow-up question. He said he did have a follow-up question. Member Antoine, go ahead, please, with your follow-up question.
Yes. Given that we are in the month of, well, May, going on into June, how many are we prepared? And this is also goes to tutor for exam in July, given the time frame, given the fact that we are now in phase 2 of opening back up Trinidad and Tobago. Is that time frame realistic? And if so, would the schools be prepared for exams? Because we would then have to look at social distancing, a whole range of other issues will come into play that is not normal for examinations involving young and personal students.
So, Mr. Chair, the Ministry has been in contact with the Ministry of Health, who has given us guidelines, clear guidelines on how we are to proceed in terms of the completing the SBAs as well as hosting the exams. We have asked our principals to look at the exam rooms to indicate to the Ministry how, in terms of social distancing and keeping the children between 6 and 8 feet apart from each other, how many rooms they will be using so that we will have information on the additional invigilators that will be required. The Ministry of Health has also advised that the schools are to be cleaned as they would normally be, and that sanitization will take the form of the bleach and water solutions, which will be applied. And we have also given our principals instructions on signage and as well as the PPE that is necessary and the protocols for entry into the school. And I think that we will be able to have those examinations as scheduled. The ministry is also in the process of providing the schools with equipment and cleaning supplies in order to facilitate preparation of the plant for the examinations. We are in luck in that the Form 5s and 6s will be the only students on the compound, so that in terms of social distancing, we'll have the whole school at our disposal.
Just before I go to Member Hussein, can we get a sense of if there's any change to the assessment format? I know I had read it in the media that in addition to the school-based assessment system, there's going to be a multiple choice and possibly an essay type question in terms of the overall format of the examination. Has that been decided upon finally?
CXC is the posting of the multiple choice paper 1, which is a normal part of the examination, and as well as the school-based assessments. For those subjects which do not have a school-based assessment, which would be French, Spanish, and visual arts, they will be either assessing the portfolios that the children had, or those children will be required to sit up paper 2. That's the proposal by the CXC.
For the schools that do have school-based assessments in place, is the ministry confident that these have been standardized? In the past, there were concerns about the uniformity of those school-based systems, school to school, in terms of the equal playing field of those assessments and its contribution to the students' final overall assessment.
Okay, so in the past, for the previous years, a percentage of the SBAs would have been moderated. I think that was 15%, but now we are going with 100% for this particular circumstance. So that will increase the validity of the assessment.
All right, Member Hussein.
Thank you, Chair. Coming back to the issue of the exams.
Member Hussein, can you move away from your device
sorry,
a bit? Thank you very much.
My apologies. Concerning the decision to have it in July, did the ministry at all consult with tutor and other stakeholders, including the 17 boards, and including MPT and so forth, as to the date in July, or have Trinidad and Tobago taken this decision that the other CARICOM countries have decided on? That's just one question, and then I'll ask the other one.
Mrs. Henry David.
So the ministry has been in contact with numerous stakeholders throughout this process.
Can you identify who they are?
The different principals associations, we have met with tutor a number of times, the Association of Denominational Boards as well. Now, this is CXC is a Caribbean-based exam. Trinidad and Tobago cannot dictate to the rest of the Caribbean countries what should happen. We had our position, which our cabinet would have agreed on.
Or act in isolation.
Right, act in isolation. So that there was voting when the COSAD met, and this was the proposal put forward at the end of the voting process. This was what was agreed on by the majority of the territories to have the exam in July.
Ma'am Hussein, you have a follow-up?
And of course, it would impact everything else, including the national scholarships. Will there be any changes in the policy regarding this award of national scholarships this year, given the unprecedented challenges that are experienced in the academic year as a result of COVID-19?
And if I could just add to that question, Member Hussein, to Mrs. Henry David, is there a system that the Education Ministry has put in place to do an analysis of whenever the exam takes place, the results for inconsistencies in students' performance that may be attributable to COVID-19, where students were on a particular trajectory and their trajectory changed after COVID-19 because it will impact significantly the admission to universities, etc., moving forward, matriculation to other levels, etc.
Sorry. At the same COSAD meeting, there was representation from UE, and what was put forward at that time was that the matriculation, the entry into UE would be based on level 1 exams that the students would already have done, and then they would take the exams that they will sit this year into consideration afterwards, but matriculation would be based on what the children have already done. Right. In terms of assessment.
So as opposed to in the past, it's not going to be based on this exam alone.
Correct.
So some level of their past performance will be included in that for more validity and reliability of what their assessment in the subject matters are.
Right. So they would be they would look at what they have done in the lower 6 exams, for example, rather than what is going to be done in July, because the exam results will come a little later on. And if we were to wait for those results, it would push back the universities and their students entering into their first.
All right. In terms of time management, can you give us a sense of what's happening with SCA?
The SCA exam will be held 1 month after students have re-entered school. And we are before the cabinet currently with we have put forward a proposal and the cabinet is considering it. So whenever school starts, the idea is that the exam will be held 1 month thereafter.
Can you give me a sense of the 68,000 students who do not have devices, who may not have been exposed to guidance or curriculum? Because I know in most cases, they would have finished the bulk of the work heading to SCA. How many standard 5 students who are eligible to sit SCA would be included in that, if you have that information, and may have been affected in the run-up to SCA? Because SCA, as CSEC, as CAPE, are standardized examination that presume that all students had as equal a playing field heading into the examination. And we know that some students have been more adversely affected than others, which may impact their assessment and determination of their competencies in the various disciplines.
We have the information, but we would need to collate that answer. So we can perhaps send that to you.
I'd appreciate that. Yes. I want to go back to the president of Tutor. In terms of the information that Mrs. De Freitas and her organization may have been able to get, because we always say in education, as many of you know, that parents and teachers are the primary interface for the learners. And the feedback that you've been getting in terms of students who had behavioral issues before the pandemic, whose behavioral issues may have been exacerbated as a result of the pandemic, and who may have developed behavioral issues and psychosocial issues in the face of the pandemic or trying to cope with the pandemic. Now, I'll start with Mrs. De Freitas in terms of what the teachers are saying, and then I can go to Professor Conrad in terms of what student support services is getting in terms of possible reports. So, Mrs. De Freitas, you first in that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But before I get into that, the questions were asked about the CVQ, the SBAs, and the CSEC, and
yes,
they were quite properly answered. So tutor would want the opportunity to provide.
Absolutely. Go ahead, please. Appreciate it.
Right. So should I start with that or should I answer this question?
No, start with that first, please.
Okay. So in the first instance, Mr. Chair and the colleagues, there was no discussion with tutor as far as the projection for the date for CSEC and CAPE examinations in July. Discussions came after that. We were informed of the ministry's proposal thereafter. 2, in terms of the SBAs, Member Hussein asked about the completion of the SBAs, the status of SBAs. A number of schools may have completed their SBAs and teachers may have uploaded the marks. There are a number of schools where the SBAs have not been completed. And it's not necessarily because we have not been able to reach out to the children because of the connectivity issues we mentioned before. One of the challenges is dependent on the subject. So going back, for example, to students doing Caribbean vocational qualifications, there's CVQ programs, for example, garment construction, for example, furniture making. Those are different from tech vox subjects being done for CSEC. Yeah? So the students doing CVQ, part of their verification comes from going into industry environments and completing it there, finishing their SBAs and then having the marks uploaded and so forth. We have not been able to complete that. The National Training Agency, NTA, has not been able to complete that because obviously our organizations are closed. And given, as Member Antoine said, given the phased reopening projected by the government, there is no telling when those students would be able to interact in that environment. Because of course, those organizations would want to first get their businesses up and running before they cater to students. So that is something we are looking at. Additionally, there is an agency of CXC that deals specifically with the CVQ and the verification, That office is based in Jamaica. That office is closed right now because of stay-at-home measures there as well. So those are the factors as far as the CVQ goes. So we need to have the time. The visual and performing arts subjects, many of the students may have completed some aspect of their proposal, of their practical. However, for the SBAs, let's take music, for example. For the SBAs, those students have composition arrangement pieces to finish, and they would also have had performance pieces. These are things we need to do in school. Obviously, they can't be done at home. We don't have the capacity to do them at home. They have to be done in school, interfacing with the teachers. The students doing technical vocational drawing at CSEC. Those, let's say our class has 15 students, colleagues, and we are moderating, as the acting CEO said, all samples instead of all items instead of a sample. Good. That means all 15 students' pieces have to be looked at. They have to be viewed. But then we have to also print for viewing, print their wide format documents because it's technical drawing. They're doing their architectural drawing pieces. Print the wide format documents in color for review, for moderation. That has to be done in school. So this is why we are saying as teachers, as tutor, some schools may be finished with SBAs, a number of students are not. If we take the internal assessments at the CAPE level, certain subjects, for example, pure math and physics, they have a pencil and paper examination that must be administered. Has to be done face-to-face to contribute towards the IA. So even if we presume that upon the reopening protocols that have been given, that we're going to sanitize and whatever, are we saying then that these children are going to be ready to move from stay-at-home measures directly into examination mode? And that brings me, therefore, to the question that the chairman has asked. The feedback from teachers, we haven't gotten feedback from all teachers on this particular issue. The feedback from teachers is that in some instances, one, the behavioral issues, the challenges faced by some of our students have been exacerbated. A case in point, a teacher at an ECCE center. Now, ECCE, they are simply being told to upload the lesson plans, not to upload activities and games and so forth. So the parent is expected to follow the lesson plan, and that is a challenge in itself. The teacher has uploaded the lesson plan, and the child in her class, she teaches the 4-year-olds in the ECCE center. The child in her class who has been diagnosed with mild autism is resisting the mother every single day. As far as that child is concerned, the routine of getting up, getting ready, and going to meet Miss has been disrupted. And of course, he doesn't understand why. The reality of COVID is not something that is there for him. We have this situation of students in Form 6. Of course, they are studying their matriculation. Case in point, top student, high-performing student, connected with the teacher, going good. And then all of a sudden, the student dropped out. So in trying to get on to the students through peers eventually, the child is having severe anxiety attacks, not because he can't do the exam. His mom is a nurse. And he's anxious about what is happening. We have had teachers who have taken a decision as a staff not to put the online engagement as a priority. Because of the community where they are, they've decided to do the pastoral care and the charity work. So on a weekly basis or a fortnightly basis, they make up 100, 150 hampers because that's what the students there, the families there need. So we do not have statistical data, Mr. Chairman, as to how many students have been affected negatively. But based on the anecdotal records, we are aware that there has been some fallout. You asked a question about tracking. Tutor realizes that is something we will have to do, track the performance of these children. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, the first Vice President, Mr. Seals, he may be able to add more in terms of the SBAs and the CVQ and so forth.
I'm glad that you're bringing in the conversation because we've had him sitting there for a while. Mr. Seals, you can join us. Please unmute your microphone.
Thank you for the opportunity. Again, Tutor as an organization, we are trying to be data-driven in our approaches. So reaching out to our members, we would have done a survey in the past and asked our members about these questions concerning the SBAs, IAs, and their ability to, while at the stay-at-home order, what their ability to complete these assignments. A lot of our members, especially in the lower performing schools, have the motivation, the motivation of our students to engage in these platforms as a major hurdle. Case in point, one of our teachers, the students actually reached out to her as a TVET teacher, asking about the possibility of getting online past papers, doing multiple choice, seeing that is now a major concern or major component of the exam. If they could get past multiple choice papers and answers. And the teacher actually did provide those documents to the students and the class. However, the follow-through on behalf of the students was not there. So they were interested in being part of the process, but they didn't have the internal motivation to complete the process, all right? And for a lot of our students, again, using Professor Conrad's phrase of we tutor being a social organization interested in social justice, we must look at those students who are in a disadvantaged situation, either not having the devices and can impact in the process at all, but also not having the support mechanisms to be able to follow through even when they have the devices on hand.
All right, thank you. Professor Conrad, if you could answer the question that I asked earlier on, based on the reports of possible behavioral issues being exacerbated by COVID-19, the psychosocial health of some students. I could give you an example. A friend of mine's 16-year-old son, who is a well-adjusted young man going to what is considered a prestige school in Port of Spain, broke down and just started to cry 2 weeks ago. And she could not, he became so overwhelmed by the COVID-19 situation and being locked down at home. And he's a well-performing student, well-adjusted, generally happy young man. And she reported to me, and she's not the only one, it may not be as extreme, but he just started to cry. And she had to call a counselor on the phone and walk him through it because she was really worried about her son's psychosocial welfare. What are the reports on that, and students with behavioral issues going into COVID-19 that may have been exacerbated, and students who were possibly affected so much by COVID-19 that they are now displaying behaviors that they may not have before. Could you unmute your mic, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We have had approximately 1,200 phone calls to our hotline. And of the calls, the vast majority of the calls have actually been on issues of poverty, people looking for food cards. They need to know what support it is. Other than that, we have seen a rise. We have had 50 cases of parents requesting counseling sessions for their children. And of those 50, we have we have had the primary reason being increased withdrawal, concerns about sexual predators, students being anxious, and 75 critical incidents that centered on suicide ideation, drownings, and either inexplicable withdrawal or aggression, which is not lasting for long, but it reflects the frustration that our students are experiencing. We have been using hotline services. We have been providing psychoeducational sessions online, targeting the management of anxiety, adjusting to new independent learning styles, and as well as understanding of the school learning management system. We have been providing virtual counseling, which is something we are kind of, some psychologists, people on different levels on that continuum of how comfortable they are, because while you are trying to engage that learner, that child's sense of space, because there are other people in the house, there's probably one computer. So that determining whether or not to tell them, give you a call later. And of course, there's also the issue of, should you give them your personal number, which some people have been challenged by. We also have, we're working particularly in terms of creating more psychosocial sessions and giving students, I think, a key issue is allowing students or facilitating students' voice. Typically in our culture, we silence students. And this is a time when, if they do not believe in an environment where they can actually say how they feel without being managed, it adds to the conflict. So we have been striving to deal with the increasing level of anxiety and the concern that often these children who will seek any means of escape. Unfortunately, some places where it's compromising, but they're going to rebel. And so we have a reality where our resources are stretched, yes, and but our officers are also learning how to find ways to engage our students.
All right, we have like 15 minutes left in this session. Just before I go to Member Hussein, I would like to ask Mrs. De Freitas or any of her team if you have had reports of teachers undergoing psychological challenges during this time also.
Mr. Chairman, I would allow either the First VP or the General Secretary to offer their responses, but yes, we have had some reports.
Yes, if Ms. Beckles can handle that, if she's...
Can you just repeat the question, please? Sorry.
The question is, if you've had any reports from teachers, and your president also indicated, yes, you have, and the types of reports you've gotten from the teaching body in Trinidad and Tobago about psychological challenges or emotional challenges they've experienced in this COVID-19 pandemic, in the transition to trying to deal with it.
Well, in particular reference to our teachers, they are trying, those that are actually doing the online, they may not be using the ministry's platform, but they're using their other platforms. remember they're at home trying to manage the home environment. They themselves would have several children to look after. Then their children would be receiving assignments from their teachers, and then they are also experiencing device issues because they may have one device. So it's a juggling of them having to. So that's one of the issues. Some of them also because of the stay at home, some of their spouses would have been laid off, right? So then they are now dealing with
their own personal challenges.
Yes, their own personal challenges, and then having to juggle online, which is new to most of them. And one of the challenges some of them experienced was they actually tried to take the classroom online. Now, for online experience, it's different. You can't take a whole classroom and just drop it online, right? So it has been a lot of adjustments, but I have been monitoring the various teachers' Facebook groups, and I have seen teachers helping teachers adjust to the new normal in terms of giving them ideas of what are some of the better resources to use, which are easier to handle, holding their hand through some of the issues that they face, right? Where they've also had the issues of parents, uncles, whoever, getting their contact information and sending inappropriate photos and comments to them. So these are all the things that they are juggling at this time. Other issues that they experience is that, for example, they have the WhatsApp group. Children would be added to the group. They would come on, leave the group, and then the teacher complained, well, you only see them posting status. So the teacher assumed that they were having connectivity issues, but then she's seeing them online doing other things, right? So then, as my first VP said before, that internal motivation is not there. And in most instances, the parents are not monitoring.
But their supervision issues, because not all home situations are the same.
Yes.
Member Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. In the written submission that you had sent to us, speaks about this, as you're saying. One is that you indicated for the Minister, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, the psycho-educational sessions on page 3 submitted were being provided. And you also indicated that guidance officers connected with students with the consent of their parents. But when I look at Appendix 1, some of the challenges which you were able to identify, that some of the persons didn't want their telephone numbers in place. They did not want to, there was a cost attached to their own personal phones now that they were incurring a cost, and therefore it might not have been very feasible for a number of persons to be able to continue with the guidance. And so I'm asking the question, what is being put in place for the guidance officers and social workers to be able to reach these children and teachers in a most efficient and effective manner? That is the first thing. And secondly, you can't take away from the fact that if parents, as Tita indicated, if parents have lost their jobs and they don't have the ability to provide for their families, you find that they will have that burden being placed on the children as well, because they don't have that ability. And in your Appendix 1, you showed us in the various districts in Victoria and Patrick, you indicated that there were 8 food cards in St. Patrick 3, South East 11, St. George's East 13. These are persons who have food cards, which total a number of 48 persons. And just recently, the minister indicated that there were 40,000 persons who were on food cards, and therefore those 40,000 children were removed from the system, and therefore they were not able to receive the food card supplement, the food card for children who access the school feeding. What are you doing in terms of one, to increase guidance officers and providing a stipend in place for them to be able to reach children and parents and teachers? Is it that they're going to be given a device, a phone device that will be separate from their own personal one, so they don't have to worry about their personal number getting out? And two, the cost of a phone call. And second, will there be any recommendations being made from the ministry to the minister for additional or the commencement of the distribution of food cards to parents who are in dire need and who have been left out because of the fact that the government took a decision to stop the food card program because of this perception that 40,000 persons out there already have food cards, but based on your Appendix 1, we only have 48 persons who have food cards, which I know might be understated.
Mr. Meyer, I think can you answer that? Or is it directed at Mr. Meyer? Thank you. Mr. Meyer, go ahead, please.
All the information that we collect in terms of the children who are in need will be passed on to the Ministry of Social Development. We are in a crisis right now. We are trying as best as we can to manage. We know that for some children, this is a difficult situation in terms that school was a sanctuary for them, where they were fed, they had people who would listen to them, they could talk to somebody, and they've lost that. And as good as the online platform is, it cannot replace that direct contact. Once we identify that there are children who need extra services in terms of even the food card, we will pass the information on to the Ministry of Social Development. I think Dr. Conrad would have some more details on this.
Go ahead, please, Professor Conrad.
Mr. Chair, only to advise the learned representative that Appendix 1 does not refer to guidance officers nor to social workers. It really would apply to the special education teachers who are out there. They do not have the same privileges as guidance officers. And so, yes, some of them are challenged in terms of the use of their phone and their details.
I'm going to go to Member Antoine, who's been waiting a while, and then Member Hussein with one final quick question, and then we'll go to closing comments from the stakeholder heads, please. Member Antoine, go ahead, please. Unmute your microphone, please. Go ahead, you're unmuted. Member Antoine, could you repeat the question, please? We just want to unmute your microphone properly. We won't hear the start of your question. Right, go ahead now, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to go back to SCA, CSEC, and CAPE. And because these exams are inevitable, there's something that will happen in the near or distant future. And a new category that would be introduced because of COVID-19, that would be students who on the day of the exam may show flu-like symptoms or allergies, and as a result will not be able to participate in the exam. What provisions will be put in place both for the students and because of the impact it would have on the families for those who are unable to sit the exam at that day and may have to sit at a later day? What would be the time frame between the exam day and when these students who they demonstrate flu-like symptoms or allergies will have to resit the exam, and what things we put in place for the student and their parents, given the kind of impact it will have on them and the community?
That's the Education Ministry, so I'm presuming.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, with respect to children exhibiting flu-like symptoms.
Could you move back from your camera a little bit, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. what we're looking at is those, for example, those children who have allergies and which may result in flu-like symptoms. We are hoping that it will be possible that the parents will take them to the health center and get some sort of medical so that they would not be debarred from their examinations. However, persons without a medical who come onto the compound during the examination times will be debarred and will have to come back with some sort of medical. In terms, also the Ministry of Health have advised that we should screen students by asking them their medical history for the past 2 weeks before allowing them onto the school compound as a matter of precaution.
Is that also going to include the medical history of possibly their family members in the same household?
Yes,
Thank you.
within the 2-week period. And with respect to SEA, there's normally a makeup examination so that whenever the exam is held, I think it's about 6 weeks later, there will be a makeup, 6 to 8 weeks later, there will be a makeup examination. With respect to CXC, that would of course depend, CXC-based exams, that would depend on when CXC is next able to host exams, which may very well be the January sitting.
Member Hussein, quick question before we give the final comments. We literally have 4 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hit 3 questions in less than 4 minutes.
No, you actually have 2 minutes to pose the question because they have to answer it.
The blind welfare has indicated that they need the services of Anil Wave in order to have their online services for their students to be effective. Without him being able to do so, they are disadvantaged on numerous scales. What is it that the ministry intends to do concerning that aspect? And also, I don't understand how we could bring online services via radio. I mean, particularly when we have a society, the children are very visual oriented. Would radio not put additional pressure onto our children? And those basically my 2 questions. And
thank you.
In terms of the online services by radio, we will go in with radio because we were trying as best as possible to give us wide access, because there are certain families that don't have a television, they don't have internet, so we thought radio was at least one other avenue, which is why we were pursuing that. It's not our best choice, but we have to explore all possibilities. In terms of the, I think it's the blind welfare, in terms of accessibility to the LMS, as I mentioned before, we have been implementing LMS actively. There was no pilot for it. So we went live and we are reviewing all aspects of the platform. And we do have some parts of the platform that can aid in the blind, visually impaired, but we are trying to increase the services to the entire platform. That's all I can say on that at this point in time.
Thank you. In the last 2 minutes, I'm going to give first Mrs. De Freitas closing comments, please, and then Mr. Meyer, the Acting Permanent Secretary in the Education Ministry. So, Mrs. De Freitas, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Thank you very much to committee members for having us here today. Tutor wants to give the assurance that in the interest of our children, in the interest of the sustainability of our nation, we remain committed to working together with all stakeholders. We would want to seek permission to present our written submissions subsequent to today's discourse. And we look forward to partnering closely, as I mentioned, in the interest of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Meyer, Acting Permanent Secretary, and if the Chief Education Officer also has a closing comment, that'll be fine too. So we go to Mr. Meyer first. Could you unmute your mic, please? Thank you.
Again, I would like to take this opportunity, I think, to thank the teachers, principals, curriculum officers for the human service they have done in the last 3 months. It has been an extremely challenging time. And I think the staff of the Ministry of Education, given our many, many constraints, has performed admirably. And I think we need to recognize that. I'd like to thank the committee for giving us this opportunity. And we will be reviewing all of our systems and with the hope that we can improve our online offering. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I'd just like to invite you also to feel free to commit your thoughts and your additional information to paper or to digital format and send it to our secretariat. We really appreciate it. We'd like to thank Mr. Kurt Meyer, the Acting Permanent Secretary in the Education Ministry, also Mrs. Lisa Henry David, Chief Education Officer Acting, and Professor Dennis Conrad, the Director of Student Support Services Division, and also from Tutor, the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, Mrs. Antonio Taker de Freitas, the President, Mr. Marlon Seas, the First Vice President, and Ms. Katie Beckles, the General Secretary. On behalf of the committee members, a member Christine Nawala Hussein, member Ansel Antoine, and the other members of the committee who are not with us today, we'd like to thank you all for being with us. We'd also like to advise the public that the following report of the committees were recently presented to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and are available for review on the Parliament's website, ttparliament.org, which is the 13th report of the Committee on an Inquiry into the Prevalence of Teenage Pregnancy and the state's capacity to minimize the occurrence of teenage pregnancy and provide services and assistance to teenage pregnancy. We'd like to thank you all for viewing and listening. On behalf of committee members, thank you for viewing and be safe out there. Thank you all. We are suspended. We'd like to thank the stakeholders for taking part, and we look forward to your submissions digitally to our secretariat. Thank you once again for your contributions. We could invite you to leave the chat now, and we're going to have a quick in-camera with the rest of the committee to discuss our next meeting. Thank you all again, and be safe out there. So Christine and Major Antoine, hold on a second, please. I didn't go too badly.
I would like to get my virtual lunch, please.
That was very good. They should actually sell lunch for you for that one. They should sell just for that. They should sell a lunch for you. You deserve it.